Greetings, travelers. It's November. I don't know what to think. Christmas is coming and spooky season is technically over. But there's a tradition that we've done here on the show, and it's just a tradition that I think goes way back, and that's telling ghost stories for Christmas. Now, it's only that November, but I want to keep spooky season alive, so I'm going to tell a bunch of ghost stories over the next few weeks. And I think that you'll all enjoy that. And hopefully, we keep that going. We'll still do our travels episodes, but I think this will just be fun. So for today, I want to follow this map, right? I kind of want to discuss where ghost stories came to America because they've become this American thing. Ghost stories go back centuries, millennia, not arguing that, but they've really become this special thing here in the States. So you go back and you think about people having hearths and telling stories by the fire, and now it's evolved to kind of this, right? That we tell stories on podcasts and YouTube videos and stuff like that. So how did we get here? I'm going to go back to when the settlers first start stepping out onto our new world. They didn't come empty-handed. They had their stuff they had brought with them, including stuff that just didn't fit in their pockets or in their bins and boxes. They brought their stories, warnings about riddles and curses and restless spirits and don't cross into these forbidden places and into these forbidden things. And they kind of just realized, oh, wow, this world has their own stories over here too. So they were wrapping the old stories with the new, mixing them amongst the trees and the rivers. And they're already trying to make sense of this land. But what was here was the indigenous peoples. And they lived in a world where the unseen are just walking with them, ready to be seen. Spirits are neighbors, they're kin, they're guardians, they're ancestors. And when the two worlds there met, one honored the spirit world and one kind of feared it. And so this new folklore is born. It is the melting pot of things like that. And, objects were something that the natives said could be attached, a spirit could be attached to them, was generally beneficial. But European, nah, it's spooky. Haunted objects are terrible. And we started learning how to tell both sides of the same story. And that's where this thing starts mixing. So these early collisions become these distinctly American stories. We get these moonlit stories and beasts in the swamps, and they just merge and become these crazy things. Now, those tales kind of do practical work. They're telling the newcomers where the land can be dangerous, how to respect the customs of people who lived here for generations, and how to grieve and find help for your sorrow of death. And these early stories, right? The woman who combs her hair by the window, the headless rider on the county lane. They're not just really a thrill. They're kind of lessons. They're boundaries you have to learn. And yet they're memory, wrapped into one. So let me give you, one of my favorites from the day that you probably haven't heard. And this one's called The Widow's Lantern. There was a small settlement where the river cut the town in half, and the winter wind always smelled of iron. They said long ago a widow kept a lantern at the river's bend every night. Her husband had gone downriver and never returned. Some nights you could still see the light weaving through the cattails like a slow thinking thing. And men going home late at night would make a wide circle so their horses would not be anywhere near that strange light. And now one freezing November, young mason named Tom, he was full of scoff at the legend, and he suddenly had a winter wager from his friends to follow the lantern. And the light bobbed and kept its distance, and he followed it, and it seemed to lead him away from the road. Tom found himself standing on the old ferry rocks. There, with water kissing his boots, he saw the widow. But not the woman the town knew. Her face was pale as river mud. Her mouth moved without sound. Tom reached instinctively to steady the lantern. When his fingers touched the metal, the flame jumped and flared into 100 small faces, all murmuring at once. Tom ran, and the next morning he could not find the path back to his own house, although he lived there for years. He woke on the other side of the river, clothes wet, lantern rusted, and it looked like he had been so thin from time that he may have been lost for weeks. But he had only been gone the night. People said the widow keeps the lantern not to guide the living home, but to keep her husband away and never walking into town again. So, a sample story there, and that's, one of those perfect examples of the early American ghost story, right? And from that, we kind of move into the next stage of America, and that was spiritualism starts coming about because of this. Parlors full of trembling hands, polite people listening for voices from the other side. The Fox sisters popularized this in the late 1840s, early 1950s. And that's becoming pretty popular, but we all know what happens next. 1860s. War. War never changes. Thank you, Fallout. War has a way of filling the dark with just echoes and crazy. So the Civil War, afterwards, the land itself seems to hold on to the sites of the lost, right? Men returned home to empty tables. Families were watching those windows, hoping to find the men coming home. Some never did. And battlefields become places where people never really leave. People speak of soldiers still on the march at dusk and phantom picket lines pacing the long grass. The scale of death is just something we never had a language to. We couldn't talk about this stuff. The scale was just insane. Battlefields swelled with ghosts, literal and figuratively. Families and communities made stories to keep those losses present. People reported soldiers marching in fog, the soft, impossible sound of far-off drums. And these tales were just kind of stitches on the wounds, right? Just these wounds wouldn't close. So we had to make up stories. And we'll tell this one right after the break. Okay, this is one I love, and it's called The Midnight Muster. And they called the field outside of Gettysburg another name once. The place was where the corn failed and the hedges grew wild. After the war, old Mr. Havel would sit by the rail and swear he could hear a march in the fog when the moon was thin. He said it was not a trick of the wind, it was a cadence, but it had a pace and a habit of its own. And one autumn evening, children dared each other to go to the rail and listen. They sat together, and their knees were cold and the air grew thick. But at first the sound was only a small tapping, then that burdened cadence, and then an unmistakable march. The men were marching, the ring of a metal canteen, a cough, and maybe a bugle sound. The children saw nothing but fog, but when they stole a look at the highway where the carts passed, there were footprints, dozens in perfect order, and they were leading into the field. And they stopped. There were graves marked there, but these ones were not at one of the gravestones. They followed the tracks to a low mound where no stone stood, and there they found a single brass button half buried. The button was cold and stamped with a unit that no longer existed. The older folks said the dead were not always cruel. Sometimes they were only embarrassed to be remembered wrong. So they put the button back in the earth, had a ceremony, had a prayer, had a 21-gun salute. They also left it a small loaf of bread. The march still came, but this time when it came, it was much less noise, and it passed softly. So, they say if you listen close, you can almost hear that cadence. But I think you hear that cadence every time we tell these stories, right? A mother afraid to walk soft, a widow certain that she feels the press of a familiar coat. These are just tales of grief, and they're now in the narrative, and they made the history more present, right? For a country kind of split at this point and then stitched together, ghosts became kind of a way to hold on to that, and and what death could not break. Of course, then the factories start coming, the country turned its face towards the future, cities spring up and swallow the acres, and people are stacked together like cordwood. And in those alleys and tenements in the big cities, a new kind of haunting kind of took root. Factory gates and the footprints of life on the line. And the ghost here, not always what you think. Usually it was just missing time, lost work, lost sleep, and sometimes lost people. So here's an industrial quick ghost story for you. In the city, where the smokestacks drew maps on the sky, there was a textile mill where the overseer kept a ledger of names and debts. One winter, the ledger listed a boy named Samuel as present, although everyone knew he'd gone home. In the middle of the night, those who lived in the row houses would hear, at the edge of their sleep, a tiny, regular sound of a loom, still hammering and turning, though no loom should be moving. And a single laundress, her name was Rosa, she woke to find a small child at her window, and his palms pressed to the glass. And he had soot in his hair, and his eyes were black like coins. Rosa set water to heat, and then she filled it, and then left a bowl of soup on the sill. By morning, the bowl was empty. What little water was there had cooled, and the coal stove had a small footprint of ash leading away, as if a small shoe had taken one last step. The ledger the next day didn't have Samuel's name. So people started whispering of a boy who worked so long he could not remember that he'd been sent home, of debt so deep that he stayed at the loom even in his dreams. So workers began to leave small tokens, small coins at the mill gate, and spoke Samuel's name out loud and said it was for you. So, yeah. City life taught new stories, right? You got to move fast. And then came the shadowy figures that slip through the streets themselves. We've got stories coming from overseas at this point. Spring Hill Jack, Jack the Ripper, and they crossed over just like those early settlers. America discovered they had their own, like H.H. Holmes and Bell Guinness, and the serial killer had arrived and brought new terrors. And then we started getting the new machines, right? A letter and a book carried news slowly, but a radio braided us together like overnight, right? When a murderer stalks that London alley and things like that, the country's leaning in, right? The Phantom wasn't just local terror. It was a story that everybody in the world could hear. And then television Oh my gosh, television brings us so much more storytelling opportunities. It becomes the hearth of telling stories. And that evolves into the more modern, where men and women with cameras are walking into abandoned houses and saying, "Hey, look, we're in a haunted house." And pocket cameras and phones have turned everybody now into witnesses and storytellers. And, any small ghost story is now a viral thing that goes all over the world. And we've also kind of learned the architecture of the scare thanks to this. We all know this stuff. And I think even now, that's fading away. Now, the phone is our hearth, videos, audio clips, and they've turned a local story into a global narrative in just minutes. And now anyone can claim witness to events and status, and anyone can amplify it. So this kind of makes it difficult for us to do the research on this for who had the original authorship. This kind of changes verification, and it kind of makes things a little tricky for ethical responsibility, stuff like that, because viral legends, yeah, they can honor a memory, but they can also just make things terrible. So as we grow more technical, we gotta imagine digital phantoms, corrupted files sometimes become cursed objects. We now have algorithmic hauntings. It's crazy. There's still that intimacy, but now you're getting stuff, weird feeds, weird hours, stuff like that. I don't know. I'm gonna do one quick story. I know we're going long on this one for my short ones, but I think kind of appropriate. So let's do this. This is one of a more recent tale that was sent to me, and I kind of like it. So there's a small town that lives half on cell phone reception and half on a river that remembers the moon. A young woman named Lila recorded an old family ghost story for a regional archive project and uploaded it at midnight to her archive. A voice on the porch telling of the bridge that refused to let a man cross until he named his dead. The file loaded, no problem. It uploaded perfect. But the next day, Lila checked and found a second file in her archive folder marked with her name, though she'd never saved that one. It was a short clip, and it was basically 3 syllables, and it just said, "Not quite yet." She played it 3 times. The sound was recorded with the same microphone she used, the same room tone, same voice. She pinned it to her folder and said, "This is not mine." So more and more classmates start calling in and said, "Did you find another clip?" And she's like, "What?" So she posted it. Comments start flooding in, and people start saying, "I heard that same voice. I heard that same thing." One person said, "My phone played this clip in my pocket when I was at work." Someone in a city across the state said their assistant's device whispered to them, "Not quite yet," when it had actually misheard him calling for a grocery list. So Lila traced the metadata and found the clip's timestamp was impossible. Some strange date, some strange time. It showed the file existed for months before her upload, before the folder was even there. It was years earlier. People began to speak of that strange upload, that they remembered it from years ago. She's like, "How is that possible?" So the file had to be there before she even did this. Was this some weird prank? And then others said that town bridge was waiting for someone to finish a sentence. So the more voices repeated this story, the more it spread. The town couldn't tell if this was a legend or real anymore. And so the town decides, we got to get rid of the bridge. This is the Erica solution. The highway crew replaces the old bridge piece by piece. But then the first truck going across wouldn't go. It would not start. And so the man who was driving the truck walked out, whispered the name of his dead grandmother. The car started and they were able to go. And then he heard the voice say, "Now is the time." So, what a strange story, right? I don't know. It's one of those, eh, it sounded almost AI written when it was sent to me. I looked it up. It is a kind of a common story in that area. So, old tales passed house to house, new tales are passed thumb to thumb. It's that's how it is now. We just changed how things are told. So, what are these stories for? They're lanterns. They still tell us where to not tread. They console us, and they also tell us when we've done bad things. And we get ghost stories from the 1770s hearth, 1860 meadows, 1990 newsstands, early 2000s it was message boards, and now 2020s it's a phone app. But they just tell us ghost stories. So if you're out there tonight, walking the streets, listen for the stories. Listen for the sounds of people still telling stories. You might hear that name on the wind or some memory that wants a voice, and whether the spirit is real or just some goofy, well, the act of telling, that's what keeps us warm at night. And let's just let you know that the ghost stories are still there. So, one last thing, take a deep breath and hold that close, for the winter is coming and we've got ghost stories to tell. Listen for the small voices that say remember, and then the scary ones that ask you not to call them aloud. And remember, we have to live with the choices we keep and the stories we tell. And we'll see you on the other side.